PXN may not be the first name you think of when it comes to sim racing, but they've actually been around the sim racing space for a little while now, and they have a lineup of 5 sim racing wheels, with the V10 being the newest of the bunch. So is the V10 racing wheel actually one of sim racing's best kept secrets? And is this the best budget friendly racing wheel you've never heard of? So I just want to start by saying that this wheel was sent to us for review, but as with all of the reviews we create, this will have absolutely no impact on the outcome of our review. The PXN V10 is a complete sim racing bundle. It consists of everything you need to go sim racing right away. You get a wheelbase with its own mounting platform, a steering wheel which is detachable, and you also get a full 3 pedal set and a H-pattern shifter. So from the outset, things are already looking pretty good. There aren't many bundles on the market that include this much equipment in a single product. The force feedback is driven by a series of gears like the older Logitech G923, but when compared to the G923, the motor inside the V10 is much stronger and is capable of producing up to 3.2 Newton meters of torque. And one other cool thing about this wheel, other than the amount of equipment, is its compatibility. Most companies struggle to create a single racing wheel that is compatible with every console. That's why we have the CSL DD and the GT DD Pro, or 2 variants of the Logitech Pro Racing wheel. Essentially, these are all the same products, but each one is only compatible with one console. The CSL DD with Xbox and the GT DD Pro with PlayStation, for an example. However, PXN has seemingly cracked the code. This V10 racing wheel is compatible with both PlayStation and Xbox consoles as well as PC. You can hook it straight up to either console via its single USB cable, and it will just work. And let's take a look at the price point of the V10. The best place to buy this wheel seems to be Amazon, with PXN's own website pointing to an Amazon listing. It's currently available for around £330 or dollars, and that puts it around the same sort of price as the Logitech G923, but around £100 or $80 more expensive than the much older G29 and G920. That represents pretty good value if you ask me, especially considering you receive a H-pattern shifter in this bundle as well. So now let's take a look at what the V10 actually looks like and the functionality you get. The wheelbase itself has a slightly odd design approach, but it's an approach I quite like. The wheelbase is small, but it comes pre-mounted to a mounting plate as standard. This allows the wheelbase to easily be mounted onto a sim rig or wheel stand. One of the reasons that I like this approach is that the plate that the wheelbase is pre-mounted to features a much wider array of mounting holes than you'd normally find on any wheelbase. The front of the base also features a nice lip, allowing you to easily push it up to the edge of a table or desk. And there are 2 mounting clamps included, allowing this to be easily mounted to a desk without the need for any screws. Around the back are a series of connection ports, allowing for the pedals and shifter to be connected, and it's here you'll also find the power supply and USB to connect to your console. There is also a manual switch that changes the steering lock for 270 to 900 degrees. The design of the actual wheelbase is pretty slick, and it's one of the nicer looking wheelbases I've come across. It looks clean, modern and fresh. And the same can be said about the steering wheel. It has a clean, no fuss approach. The first thing that I noticed about this wheel was just how lightweight it is. It comes detached from the wheelbase as standard, so it's the first thing you'll take out of the box. Weighing in at just 570 grams, this is by far the lightest steering wheel I've ever used. The wheel has a pretty slender design and is constructed entirely from plastic, and both of these elements lead to the super lightweight approach. The hand grips are wrapped in a synthetic suede material and feel pretty nice to hold. I'm not quite sure how well this will hold up over time if not used with racing gloves, as suede materials do tend to wear worse than leather or rubber. But after a fair amount of use on my rig, mine still looks pretty brand new. On the face of the wheel are a series of 13 push buttons, which is about standard. Each button has a pretty short range of travel and each one feels pretty nice to activate. And that is more than can be said about the paddle shifters. This is probably my biggest dislike about this whole bundle. Both shifters have a nice audible click when activating, which is good, but they have a really long throw. The shifters travel over an inch to reach their final destination, which is way too far. Also, the activation of each shift happens about halfway through the travel. Once you hear the click, you can still pull the shifter another 10mm or so. This also leads to another problem, which is that the shifters hit the rear of my fingers when racing. Every time I pulled a shift, I would hit the rear of the remaining fingers that were still on the wheel. This was actually kind of painful after a long race and really forced me to adjust my driving style. I ended up shifting with all of my fingers rather than leaving some on the wheel, which was far from ideal. Underneath the shifters are a couple of dual clutch paddles which feel much nicer to use. And finally, on the rear of the wheel rim, there's also a manual quick release. This allows the wheel rim to be fully detached and is controlled using a screw mechanism. The pedals are a full 3 pedal set which are eerily similar to the Thrustmaster TLCM pedals. Much like the steering wheel, this pedal set is incredibly light due to the entire set being constructed from plastic. They feature a little bit of adjustability, although not the same amount that you'd find on more premium products. You can adjust the springs at the rear of each pedal using a manual plastic screw mechanism, and you can also adjust the pedal plate positioning. As mentioned, each pedal features a spring at the rear, and this is what gives the pedal its resistance. The resistance is pretty linear, but I'll talk about that more in the performance part of this review. On the rear you have a couple of connection ports, and there are some mounting holes underneath which allow you to mount the pedals to your rig pretty easily. The included H-pattern shifter is a nice touch, and overall it looks pretty par for the course. Much like the other elements in this bundle, the shifter is primarily constructed from plastic, and there is a clamp at the back to mount it to your sim rig or table. Much like the pedals, PXN seems to have looked in Thrustmaster's direction when designing this shifter. The shape and design is very reminiscent of the TH8A, but that's not a bad thing. There are a couple of buttons towards the rear of the shifter labelled parking brake and low high, and these can be programmed in games where required and give the shifter a little extra functionality. When it comes to performance and gameplay, this bundle handles itself well in general. The force feedback that is created from the 3.2 Nm gear driven wheelbase is decent, and it's a nice step up in terms of power and strength from its main gear driven competitor, the G923. The Logitech wheel produces just over 2 Nm of torque, which allows this V10 wheel to feel very powerful in comparison. The general forces that were produced are strong, and there is a good amount of resistance when throwing your car into a turn. I would have preferred a little more wheel dampening in the wheel itself, as it does feel quite light when you're throwing the wheel about. And this has less to do with the weight of the steering wheel itself, and more to do with the force feedback. When correcting slides or oversteer moments, I felt like I didn't have the accuracy to catch the car as well as I would with the G923, and that's due to the lack of resistance during these moments. I'm going to be making a few comparisons to the G923 wheel, as that really is this wheel's direct competitor. But much like that wheel, you really can feel the gears doing their thing. The major downside of any gear-driven racing wheel is the mechanical feeling of the gears making contact. There are also some moments where the whole wheelbase feels like it's going to shake itself apart. These moments are again down to the gears and only happen in heavy force feedback moments. This sensation can be minimised by dialing in some of the force feedback settings either in-game or on the wheelbase directly. And while a lot of the negatives of using gears are present here, the accompanying sound isn't. The V10 sounded a lot quieter than the G923 during operation, allowing me to focus more on the racing. While there is a slight lack of resistance and loss of detail due to the gear technology, the force feedback overall is still decent. It has a surprising amount of pure strength for its tiny size, and you could really learn to feel how your car reacts to the road. The pedals feel okay to use at best. With the ability to adjust the strength of the springs, you could make each pedal feel different, although out of the box the throttle and clutch feel almost the same. There isn't too much, if any, progression in each pedal, but without a secondary damper, this is to be expected. And what is refreshing is that the brake pedal is much more accessible than with the G923. The G923 brake is incredibly stiff, opting for a heavy feel, while the brake pedal in the PXN V10 is much lighter. You can dial up the resistance slightly using the adjustment screw, but even at its highest setting the brake feels relatively light, and this is both a good and a bad thing. Even at its strongest resistance, I found all 3 pedals to be way too light for me. I struggled for quite a while, both under braking and acceleration, to adjust to the lightness of these pedals. but after some time I was able to achieve a fairly competent level of skill using this pedal set. And on the other hand, the light feeling of all three pedals makes this pedal set extremely accessible and usable for a wide range of racers. The included shifter is a nice touch, and each shift has a relatively short throw which gives it a nice sporty feeling, although I would have preferred a slightly longer shifter arm. This shifter is rather similar in terms of performance to the Logitech shifter and is certainly more on the side of a toy rather than a sim product. Each shift feels okay to activate, although there could have been a lot more resistance included. The shifts feel a little bit light and you can knock the shifter out of gear pretty easily. The shifter is a 6 pattern plus reverse, and the reverse gear is accessed by pushing the shifter down and into 6th. Overall, this is a nice addition to have, and with a little extra resistance and a longer shifter arm, this could have been very good. And when it comes to adjustability, the PXN again takes a fairly unique approach. Instead of having to download additional software to your PC, you simply download a mobile app which connects over Bluetooth. You can change the force feedback strength along with a few other options, and this is appreciated and is something missing from a few competitive products if racing on a console. And then there's also the adjustability in the pedals, which is also something rarely found on products within this price range. And of course there is the quick release on the wheelbase. Although I don't think there are currently any other PXN steering wheels available for the V10, but I presume there will be some in the future to make use of this quick release mechanism. Compatibility, as I mentioned at the beginning, is excellent with PlayStation 4, 5, all modern Xbox consoles and PC. Although compatibility within PXN's own product range is lacking at this moment in time. As I just mentioned, there are no other wheel rims, and you can't use this product with any of PXN's other products currently. If you are racing on PC though, you do have the option of using the pedals and gear shifter with racing wheels from other brands, as they can be directly connected to your PC via USB. As you've probably picked up on by now, this wheel does have a few drawbacks that I have already mentioned. My main issue with this wheel bundle is both the shifter paddles and an overall feeling of lack of quality in some of the materials used. Starting with the shifters, they don't feel great to use at all. There is a lot of travel in both shifters and there's a lot of additional play after you've activated them. The fact that they hit your fingers during use is pretty unacceptable. Simply moving the shifters a little further away from the wheel rim or preventing the additional travel would potentially solve this issue. Then, looking at the materials in use, there's a lot of plastic on show. Adding a little bit of metal here or there, much like Logitech do, would increase the build quality massively. And one area where this is very apparent is with the H pattern shifter. The whole shifter is constructed from plastic and it certainly feels more like a toy than something a serious sim racer would choose to race with. So now, I'm going to move on to whether I'd recommend this wheel or not. And you know what? I was actually relatively impressed with the equipment on offer. There is a lot to like with the PXN V10, from the sheer amount of equipment included to the stronger than expected force feedback. As an entry-level racing wheel, the V10 performs pretty well. I'd say it holds up against budget offerings from Logitech and Thrustmaster in its overall performance, but it lacks a little polish and overall build quality. While the PXN V10 does feel more like a toy than a serious racing wheel, it does give a remarkably better experience than super entry-level racing wheels such as the Hori Apex. It includes everything you need to go sim racing on any console for a relatively low price. And if that tickles your fancy, then the V10 may just be worth picking up.